The morning shift on Vega Station started like any other day. Commander Kang walked through the main corridor checking the daily reports on his tablet. The mining operations were running smoothly, and the crew was meeting their quotas. 300 beings from 12 different species worked together on this remote outpost at the edge of known space. Yuki sat at her communications desk, monitoring the radio channels. She listened to the chatter between mining ships and the station, while sipping her morning coffee. The routine messages about ore shipments and equipment repairs filled the speakers with familiar sounds. Down in the maintenance section, Day was reviewing work orders with his team. The Altarian engineers with their crystal-like bodies worked alongside human technicians. Their clear forms sparkled under the bright lights as they discussed repairs to the air recycling system. Everything changed at exactly 8:47 station time. A sound like thunder split through the metal walls. The entire station shook violently. Emergency lights began flashing red throughout every corridor. Yuki dropped her coffee cup as alarms started screaming from every speaker. "Hull breach in Sector 7, she announced over the intercom. Her voice stayed calm despite the fear growing in her chest. "All personnel evacuate Sector 7 immediately." But this was no ordinary hull breach. Through the twisted metal of the outer wall came something that should not exist. It squeezed through the opening like thick black liquid before taking solid form inside the station. The creature stood 12 feet tall on legs thick as tree trunks. Its body was covered in scales that looked like black mirrors. Each scale reflected the emergency lights in ways that hurt to look at. 6 arms ending in claws the size of swords hung from its massive torso. But the worst part was its head. The head was too large for even its huge body. Its mouth could open wide enough to swallow a person whole. Rows of teeth like broken glass filled that mouth. Above the teeth were 2 eyes that glowed red like burning coals. When those eyes looked at you, something deep inside your mind screamed that you were going to die. The first person to see the beast was an Altarian engineer named Zell. He had been checking pressure readings when the wall exploded inward. When the creature's red eyes fixed on him, Zell made a sound like breaking crystal. His clear body began to crack from pure terror. Within seconds he shattered completely, leaving only glittering pieces on the floor. The beast stepped over the remains and moved deeper into the station. It walked slowly, turning its massive head from side to side. It seemed to be listening for something. When it heard the first scream from down the corridor, its mouth opened in what might have been a smile. Security Chief Hana was running toward Sector 7 when she heard the screaming. She had her weapon ready and her team behind her. But when they turned the corner and saw the creature, 2 of her officers dropped their guns and ran. The third officer, a brave Nebulan named Voss, tried to fire at the beast. The energy bolts hit the creature's scales and bounced off like raindrops. The beast turned its attention to Voss and let out a roar that shook the walls. The sound was more than just noise. It carried something that reached into the deepest part of every living mind and told it to be afraid. Voss, who existed as a cloud of gas inside a protective suit, simply dispersed. His suit fell empty to the floor as his gaseous form scattered in pure panic. Hana grabbed the fallen suit and dragged it away from the beast, hoping Voss could pull himself back together later. As the creature moved through the station, it seemed to grow larger. Each scream it heard, each person who ran in terror, somehow fed it. The beast's scales became shinier, its claws sharper, its red eyes brighter. Engineer Tay was helping evacuate the lower levels when he saw the pattern. The creature always moved toward the loudest screams. It hunted fear itself. When someone was truly terrified, the beast could find them anywhere in the station. "It feeds on fear," Tay told Commander Kang over the radio. "The more scared we are, the stronger it gets." But knowing this did not make it easier to stay calm. The creature's very presence seemed designed to create terror. Just looking at it made rational thought difficult. Just hearing its footsteps made hearts race and hands shake. Young technician Bin was working in the deep maintenance tunnels when the attack began. He heard the alarms and felt the station shake, but the tunnels were far from Sector 7. He began making his way toward the evacuation points like everyone else. But as Bin climbed through the narrow passages between the station's walls, he could hear everything happening above him. He heard the screams and the sound of the creature's claws on metal floors. He heard Commander Kang trying to coordinate the evacuation while Security Chief Hana reported that their weapons were useless. Through a ventilation grate, Bin saw the creature for the first time. It was standing in the main corridor, its huge head tilted to one side like it was listening. 3 Keltorian workers tried to sneak past it, moving as quietly as they could. But one of them was shaking so badly from fear that his equipment rattled. The beast's head snapped toward the sound. It moved faster than something that large should be able to move. The Keltorians screamed and ran, but the creature caught the most frightened one easily. Bin watched in horror as the beast seemed to breathe in the Keltorian's terror before finishing him. What disturbed Bin most was how the creature looked satisfied afterward. Not just fed, but pleased. It enjoyed the fear as much as it needed it. This was a predator that hunted terror itself, and it was very good at its job. As evacuation pods began launching from the station, carrying the survivors to safety, Bin realized he was trapped. The creature now stood between him and the evacuation bays. It had grown even larger, nearly touching the ceiling with its massive head. Bin pressed himself against the ventilation grate and tried not to breathe too loudly. The beast was so close he could hear its breathing. Each breath sounded like wind through a cave. The creature's red eyes swept back and forth, searching for more prey. The young technician knew that if he felt too much fear, the creature would find him. But how could anyone not be afraid of such a monster? How could anyone stay calm when death itself was hunting them through the corridors of their home? Outside the station, the evacuation pods floated in space waiting for rescue ships. Inside, the beast continued its hunt, growing stronger with each terrified heartbeat it heard echoing through the metal walls. The creature moved through Vega Station like a living nightmare. Every step it took left deep claw marks in the metal floors. Every breath it drew seemed to pull the warmth from the air around it. The beast had learned the layout of the station, quickly, and now it hunted with terrible purpose. Commander Kang tried to coordinate the remaining survivors from the emergency command center. His hands shook as he watched the security monitors. The creature appeared on screen after screen, always moving toward areas where people were hiding. It never got lost. It never hesitated. It always knew exactly where to find the most frightened person on the station. "How does it know where we are?" asked Yuki from her position at the communications console. She had managed to send out several distress calls, but the nearest rescue ships were still hours away. Her voice stayed steady, but sweat ran down her face despite the cold air. Security Chief Hana had gathered the remaining security team in the armory. They had tried every weapon in their arsenal against the beast. Energy rifles, plasma cannons, even an old-fashioned explosive grenade. Nothing worked. The creature's black scales seemed to absorb energy weapons completely. Physical attacks just bounced off like pebbles thrown at a mountain. "It does not just hunt randomly," Hana told her team. "Watch the security feeds. It always goes to the person who is most afraid. The more terrified someone gets, the faster it finds them." She was right. On the monitors, they could see the pattern clearly. A group of Centaurian workers would be hiding in a storage room, trying to stay quiet. But one of them would start shaking with fear. Within minutes, the creature would appear outside their door, somehow knowing exactly where the frightened person was located. The beast seemed to feed on terror in a way that made it stronger and more intelligent. After each kill, it moved faster. Its red eyes glowed brighter. Its massive body grew even larger. But worst of all, it seemed to be learning about the station and its inhabitants. Engineer Tay had barricaded himself in the computer core room. Surrounded by humming servers and blinking lights, he searched through old research files. He needed to understand what they were fighting. The creature was unlike anything in the galactic databases, but there were hints in some very old papers. "Commander," Tay called over the radio, "I found something. There are research notes from the geological survey team that mapped this asteroid field 50 years ago. They found some strange energy readings deep in the largest asteroid. The readings were so unusual they recommended further study. But the project was canceled." Tay's fingers flew over his keyboard as he pulled up more files. "The energy signature matches something from theoretical physics papers. interdimensional entities that exist by consuming emotional energy. They need fear to survive like we need food and water. Commander Kang listened to Tay's report while watching the creature on his monitors. The beast had found another group of survivors and was slowly approaching their hiding place. The people inside were becoming more frightened by the second, and the creature seemed to grow excited as their terror increased. "How long has it been sleeping in that asteroid?" Kang asked. "Could be thousands of years," Tay replied. "Maybe millions. It was waiting for enough intelligent life to gather in one place. Our mining operation woke it up when we drilled too deep." Young. Ben was still trapped in the maintenance tunnels when he overheard this conversation on his emergency radio. He had been crawling through the narrow spaces between walls for over an hour, trying to reach the evacuation bays. But every route he tried was blocked by the creature or by collapsed debris. Through the ventilation grates, Ben could observe the beast more closely than anyone else had managed. He watched it hunt 3 different groups of survivors. Each time, the pattern was the same. The creature would stand perfectly still and seem to listen. Then its massive head would turn toward wherever the most frightened person was hiding. But Ben noticed something else. When the creature passed by areas where people were unconscious or already dead, it showed no interest at all. It only hunted living beings who were actively experiencing fear. A person who was merely nervous or worried did not attract its attention. But someone who was truly terrified called to it like a beacon in the darkness. During one of these observations, Ben saw something that puzzled him. An elderly Andromedan janitor named Kelm was mopping floors in a side corridor when the creature appeared. Kelm looked up at the beast with mild curiosity, as if he was seeing an unusual but not particularly interesting piece of equipment. The creature stopped and stared at Kelm for a long moment. Its red eyes grew brighter as it tried to understand why this being showed no fear. Kelm simply nodded politely at the monster and continued mopping. After several seconds, the creature seemed to lose interest and walked away, leaving the janitor completely unharmed. Ben filed this information away in his mind. The beast could only sense and hunt those who were afraid. People who felt no fear were invisible to it. But how could anyone not be afraid when facing such a monster? As the hours passed, the creature methodically hunted down the remaining survivors. Each kill made it stronger and more dangerous. The evacuation pods floating outside the station could only watch helplessly as their friends and colleagues were picked off one by one. Yuki managed to maintain contact with the rescue ships, but their estimated arrival time kept getting pushed back. Equipment failures and navigation problems seemed to plague every vessel that tried to reach Vega Station. "Something is interfering with our ships," reported Captain Sato from the lead rescue vessel. "Every time we get close to your position, our systems start failing. It is like something does not want us to reach you." Commander Kang realized that the creature's influence was extending beyond the station itself. As it grew stronger from feeding on fear, its power reached further into space. The rescue ships might not be able to reach them at all. The beast was becoming something more than just a predator. It was becoming a force of nature, fed by terror and growing stronger with each frightened heartbeat. And there were still dozens of people trapped on the station, hiding in dark corners and praying they would not be found next. The creature had grown massive during its hunt through Vega Station. It now stood nearly 15 feet tall, its black scales gleaming like oil in the emergency lighting. Its 6 arms had grown longer and more powerful. The red glow from its eyes cast eerie shadows on the walls wherever it walked. Only 37 survivors remained scattered throughout the station. Most were hiding in the central hub, the most secure area they could find. Commander Kang had gathered them there, hoping the reinforced walls might slow the beast down long enough for rescue to arrive. But rescue seemed impossible now. The creature's growing power was affecting space itself around the station. Ships that tried to approach suffered complete system failures. Some rescue vessels had simply vanished from sensors entirely, as if they had never existed. Ben was still crawling through the maintenance tunnels when he heard the final evacuation order. All remaining survivors were to gather in the central hub for a last stand. The young technician began making his way toward the hub through the narrow passages he knew so well. As he crawled through a junction between two major ventilation shafts, Bin accidentally knocked his tool belt against a maintenance panel. The panel made a loud clicking sound that echoed through the metal walls. In the sudden silence that followed, everyone in the station could hear that tiny sound. The creature, which had been stalking a group of Rigelian miners on Deck 4, stopped immediately. Its massive head tilted to one side as it listened. Then it began moving toward the sound with frightening speed. Within seconds, it was standing directly above Bin's hiding place. The beast pressed its face against the ventilation grate. Its glowing red eyes stared down at the young human crouched in the narrow tunnel. Bin could feel the creature's breath, hot and smelling like sulfur, flowing through the metal slats. This was it? This was how he was going to die. Bin looked up at the monster that had terrorized his home and killed his friends. He waited for the fear to come, the same terror that had made every other person scream when faced with this nightmare. But instead, a fear something else bubbled up from deep inside Bin's chest. It started as a small chuckle, barely audible. Then it grew into a genuine laugh. Not the hysterical laughter of someone who had lost their mind, but the real laughter of someone who found something truly funny. The creature's glowing eyes blinked, in confusion. It had never encountered this response before. Every living being it had ever met responded to its presence with terror. Fear was the only emotion it understood, the only one that made sense to its ancient mind. But Bin was laughing at it, not screaming, not running, not begging for mercy, just laughing like he had heard the funniest joke in the galaxy. "Really?" Bin said, looking up at the massive monster through the grate. "This is what everyone is so scared of. You look like an angry lizard having a bad day." The creature opened its mouth and let out the same roar that had sent entire species fleeing in panic. The sound shook the walls and made the metal grate vibrate. It was a sound designed by evolution and nightmare to trigger pure terror in any living thing that heard it. Bin laughed harder. The roar was so loud and dramatic that it struck him as completely ridiculous. The creature was trying so hard to be frightening that it had become funny instead. It was like watching someone put on a monster costume and jump out yelling, "Boo!" at adults. "Oh, come on," Bin giggled. "You cannot be serious with that noise. You practice that in front of a mirror. Hey everyone, look at me, I am so scary with my big mouth and my glowing eyes. Fear me because I can make loud sounds." For the first time since it had entered the station, the creature took a step backward. Something was wrong. This small being's strange response was having an effect that the beast did not understand. Instead of growing stronger from the encounter, it felt somehow weakened. In the central hub, the other survivors watched the security monitors in amazement. They could see Bin in the ventilation tunnel, laughing at the monster that had killed dozens of their friends. And they could see the creature, looking confused and uncertain for the first time. "Is he insane?" whispered Dr. Park, the station's medical officer. "No," said Commander Kang slowly. "Look at the creature. It is getting smaller." He was right. The beast, which had grown massive by feeding on fear, was visibly shrinking. Not by much, but enough to notice. Its scales seemed less shiny. Its red eyes burned less brightly. Something about Bin's laughter was draining the creature instead of feeding it. Engineer Tay watched his instruments with growing excitement. "The energy readings are changing," he reported. "Whatever powers this thing, Bin's response is disrupting it." The creature tried roaring again, putting even more effort into making the sound as terrifying as possible. It opened its mouth wider than ever before, showing every razor-sharp tooth. The roar shook the entire station and triggered emergency alarms throughout every section. Bin nearly fell over laughing. "Oh wow, you really think you are something special, do not you? Let me guess, that usually works great on everyone else. Well, sorry to disappoint you, but you just look silly, like a giant baby having a tantrum because someone took away its favorite toy." The creature's confusion was obvious now. It tilted its massive head from side to side, trying to understand this impossible situation. Every instinct told it that the small being should be terrified. The fear should be flowing into it like water into a dry sponge. Instead, it felt weaker with each laugh. In the central hub, Communications Officer Yuki felt something she had not experienced in hours. Hope. Bin found something, she said over the radio. Whatever he is doing, it is working. The creature looks lost. Security Chief Hana studied the monitors carefully. It does not know how to handle someone who is not afraid. This might be our chance. But the beast was not ready to give up. It began tearing at the ventilation grate with its massive claws, trying to reach the laughing human. Metal screamed as the grate was ripped away. Now only a few feet of empty space separated Bin from 6 sets of razor-sharp claws. The creature reached into the tunnel, its claws scraping against the narrow walls as it tried to grab the small human. But Bin just smiled up at it and shook his head. "You know what the really funny part is?" Bin said, easily staying out of reach in the narrow tunnel. "You have been scaring everyone by being big and loud and scary. But you are just a bully, and like most bullies, you do not know what to do when someone is not impressed." The creature let out a frustrated growl and tried harder to reach him. But the tunnel was too narrow for its massive claws, and Bin could move through the maintenance passages better than anyone on the station. For the first time since the attack began, the monster was not in control. It had met something it could not understand, something that did not fit into its simple worldview of predator and prey, fear and feeding, and that something was still laughing at it. Word of Bin's discovery spread quickly through the remaining survivors. Over the radio networks and through whispered conversations, everyone learned that laughter could somehow weaken the creature. But as several people quickly discovered, fake laughter did not work. Dr. Park tried forcing himself to laugh at the monster when it appeared near the medical bay. But his laughter was hollow and desperate, born from hope rather than genuine amusement. The creature ignored him completely and continued hunting for truly frightened prey. "It has to be real," Bin explained over the radio as he moved through the maintenance tunnels. "The thing can tell the difference between real emotions and fake ones. You cannot just pretend to find it funny. You have to actually think it is ridiculous." This was harder than it sounded. The creature was still massive and deadly. It had killed dozens of people and terrorized the entire station. How could anyone genuinely find such a monster amusing? But Communications Officer Yuki was beginning to understand. As she watched the beast on her security monitors, she started to see what Bin had seen. The creature was trying so hard to be terrifying that it had become like a bad actor in a horror movie. "Look at how it walks," she said to Commander Kang, pointing at the screen. "It is stomping around like it wants everyone to hear how scary it is. And that roar. It keeps doing the same roar over and over like it only learned one scary sound." Commander Kang watched the monitors more carefully. The creature was indeed behaving in predictable ways. It would appear, roar dramatically, hunt down the most frightened person, then move on to the next area. There was something almost mechanical about its behavior. It is like it is following a script, Kang realized. Be scary, make noise, find frightened people, repeat. It does not know how to do anything else. Engineer Tay had been studying the creature's energy patterns when he made another observation. "Its entire existence is based on fear," he reported. "It does not just eat fear, it is fear. Take away the terror and it starts to lose its identity." This gave Yuki an idea. She began making jokes about their situation over the radio, describing their predicament in the most absurd terms she could think of. "So here we are," she said, "trapped on a space station with a giant monster that throws temper tantrums when people do not scream loud enough for it." Her description was so ridiculous that several human crew members actually chuckled, despite their dire situation. And each genuine laugh seemed to weaken the creature a little more. Security Chief Hana joined in from her position in the armory. "I bet it practices that roar in the mirror every morning. Do you think it has a favorite scary face? Maybe it takes acting lessons from other interdimensional monsters." The absurd image of the creature taking drama classes made Bin laugh so hard he nearly fell out of the ventilation shaft he was crawling through. And with each laugh, the beast became visibly smaller and more confused. The other human survivors began to see the humor in their impossible situation. They were being terrorized by what was essentially a very large, very dramatic fear monster that had never learned how to handle someone not being afraid of it. Engineer Tay pointed out that the creature looked like it was having a breakdown whenever someone laughed at it. It is like watching a bully realize that nobody actually thinks they are cool, he observed. But the alien survivors still found nothing funny about the situation. To them, the creature remained absolutely terrifying. They watched in bewilderment as the humans found humor in what should be a life-or-death situation. "How can you laugh?" asked Voss, the Nebulan who had managed to pull himself back together after dispersing in panic earlier. "That thing almost killed all of us." "That is exactly why we are laughing," Ben explained as he crawled through another tunnel. "This whole situation is so ridiculous that the only sane response is to laugh at it. We are being hunted by a monster that gets confused when people do not act scared. How is that not funny?" The creature, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly frustrated. It had tried roaring louder, growing larger, and moving faster. Nothing worked against the human's strange response. Every time it encountered one of the laughing humans, it felt weaker instead of stronger. It tried a new approach, appearing suddenly in front of Dr. Park and opening its mouth wide enough to show every razor-sharp tooth. But Dr. Park, inspired by his colleague's example, looked at the display and started giggling. "You know what you look like," Park said between chuckles. "You look like my nephew when he is trying to scare his little sister. All drama and no substance." The creature's red eyes dimmed noticeably. It was not used to being compared to someone's nephew. In its home dimension, it was a force of nature, a living nightmare that commanded respect and terror. But here, these strange beings treated it like a misbehaving child. Yuki made another observation that sent the humans into fresh laughter. "I just realized something," she announced over the radio. "This thing has been stomping around our station for hours, and it has not figured out how to use the doors properly. It keeps tearing through walls when there are perfectly good doorways right next to them." She was right. The creature, despite its intelligence, seemed incapable of understanding basic concepts like door handles. It treated every barrier as something to be destroyed rather than simply opened. "Maybe it does not have doors where it comes from," suggested Tay. "It probably just smashes through everything back home too." The image of the creature trying to order food at a restaurant or use public transportation struck the humans as hilariously absurd. Here was this massive, supposedly terrifying monster that could not even figure out how to open a door like a civilized being. Their laughter was no longer just weakening the creature. It was actively hurting it. The beast began to move more slowly, its massive form becoming less solid and more translucent. The red glow in its eyes flickered like dying flames, but the creature was not ready to give up entirely. It still had one advantage. While the humans had learned to laugh at it, there were still plenty of terrified aliens throughout the station. It could feed on their fear to regain its strength. The beast began moving toward the areas where the most frightened survivors were hiding. If it could not handle the laughing humans, it would simply avoid them and focus on prey that still feared it properly. However, the humans were not about to let their friends continue to suffer. If laughter could weaken this monster, then they were going to laugh at it until it gave up and went home. Ben coordinated with the other human survivors to set up what he called laugh traps throughout the station. Whenever the creature appeared somewhere, at least one human would be nearby to start mocking it. The monster found itself facing ridicule everywhere it went. Its dramatic entrances were met with giggles. Its terrifying roars were compared to everything from upset cats to broken machinery. Its attempts at intimidation were treated like bad theater performances. For a being that existed on fear and terror, this response was worse than any weapon the security team had tried. The humans were not just refusing to be afraid, they were actively finding it amusing. And that amusement was poison to everything the creature was. The creature made one final, desperate attempt to reclaim its power. Drawing on every ounce of fear still present on the station, it began to grow again. The terrified alien survivors unwillingly fed it their terror, and the beast swelled to its largest size yet. It now stood nearly 20 feet tall, its black scales gleaming like polished metal, its 6 arms ending in claws that could tear through solid steel. The monster positioned itself in the main corridor leading to the central hub where most survivors had gathered. Its red eyes blazed brighter than ever before as it prepared for what it intended to be its final, most terrifying display. But Bin had other plans. The young technician had spent the last hour crawling through maintenance tunnels to reach the perfect position. He emerged from a wall panel directly in front of the creature, standing in the middle of the corridor with his hands on his hips. At barely 5.5 feet tall, he looked like a child confronting a mountain. "Okay, that is enough," Bin said, his voice calm and clear. "We need to have a talk." The creature lowered its massive head until its glowing eyes were level with the small human. This close, Bin could see his own reflection in those burning red orbs. He could feel the heat radiating from the monster's body. Every instinct in his human brain screamed at him to run. Instead, he smiled. "You know what your problem is," Bin continued as if he was having a casual conversation with a friend. "You only know one way to exist. You think fear is the only emotion that matters, but humans are different. We do not let fear control us. We choose what to do with it." The creature opened its mouth and let out its most powerful roar yet. The sound was so loud that it shattered light fixtures throughout the corridor. Emergency alarms triggered as the station's structure shook from the acoustic assault. It was a sound that should have sent any living being fleeing in absolute terror. Bin waited for the echoes to die down, then began to clap slowly. "Very impressive," he said. 10 out of 10 for volume, but you know what that sounded like to me? It sounded like someone who is really, really scared." The creature's eyes flickered with confusion. It had never been called scared before. It was fear itself, the thing that scared others. How could it be afraid? "Oh yes," Bin continued, warming to his theme. "You are absolutely terrified. You are scared that you might not be as important as you think you are. You are scared that someone might not find you frightening. You are scared that you might just be ordinary." Behind him, the other human survivors began to understand what Bin was doing. He was not just mocking the creature, he was showing it the truth about itself. Commander Kang stepped forward to join Bin in the corridor. "He is right," Kang said, looking up at the towering monster. "You are just a big bully who throws tantrums when people do not give you the attention you want." Yuki emerged from the communications center, her equipment still crackling with static from the creature's roar. "Back on Earth, we have a saying," she told the beast. "The dogs that bark the loudest are usually the most scared. And you, my friend, are doing a lot of barking." One by one, the human survivors left their hiding places and came to stand in the corridor with Bin. They formed a line facing the creature, none of them showing fear. Some were smiling. Others looked merely curious, as if they were observing an interesting but harmless animal. Engineer Tay pulled out his scanner and began taking readings. "Fascinating," he muttered. "Its energy signature is completely different when it is not feeding on fear. It is actually quite weak without terror to sustain it." Security Chief Hana crossed her arms and studied the creature like a professional evaluating a poorly trained recruit. "You know what I think?" she said. "I think you have been alone in that asteroid for so long that you forgot how to interact with intelligent beings. You only remember the scary parts." Dr. Park approached the creature as if it were a patient. "Has anyone ever tried talking to you before?" he asked gently. "Or do you just roar at everyone until they run away? That must be very lonely." The creature's confusion was total now. These beings were not responding correctly to anything it did. They were supposed to be afraid. They were supposed to scream and run and feed it with their terror. Instead, they were treating it like it was the one who needed help. Bin stepped closer to the monster, close enough to touch its massive claws if he wanted to. "Here is what I think happened," he said. "You have been sleeping in that asteroid for so long that you forgot there are other ways to live. You think everything is about fear because that is all you remember. But fear is not the most important emotion." The young technician gestured to his fellow humans. "We feel fear too. We were all scared when you first showed up. But we chose not to let that fear control us. We chose to find humor in the situation instead. We chose to help each other instead of just running away." The creature was shrinking. Again. But this time it was not because it was being weakened. It was changing, becoming less solid and more like a shadow of its former self. The red glow in its eyes was fading to a dull orange. Fear is not strength, Bin continued. Fear is just fear. Real strength comes from choosing hope over despair, laughter over tears, and courage over cowardice. You could learn that too if you wanted to. For the first time since entering the station, the creature made a sound that was not a roar. It was a small, confused whimper, like a lost child calling for help. The humans looked at each other with sudden understanding. This monster was not evil. It was just lost and frightened itself. It had been alone for so long that it had forgotten any way of existing except through fear. You do not have to keep being this way, Dr. Park said softly. You could choose to be something else, something better. The creature looked around at all the humans surrounding it. For the first time, it saw them not as prey to be hunted, but as beings with their own thoughts and feelings. Beings who had chosen to be brave instead of letting fear control them. Slowly, the monster began to fade away. Not destroyed, but returning to wherever it had come from. As it disappeared, its final roar was different from all the others. It sounded less like a threat and more like a goodbye. When the rescue ships finally arrived at Vega Station, they found the survivors alive and well. The alien crew members looked at their human colleagues with new respect and wonder. They had witnessed something remarkable, something that would be talked about throughout the galaxy for years to come. Commander Kang filed his report with the Galactic Council, describing how humanity had faced a cosmic horror, not with superior weapons or advanced technology, but with the simple choice to laugh instead of scream. The report became required reading at every military academy and xenobiology institute in known space. But the real lesson was simpler than any academic study could capture. It was about the nature of courage itself. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to choose hope over despair, to find light in darkness, and sometimes to giggle at the roar of monsters. Bin returned to his duties as a maintenance technician, but he carried with him the knowledge that the most human response to the universe's darkness was not to fight it or flee from it, but simply to refuse to let it steal the joy from living. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, a creature that had once fed on fear was learning that there were other emotions worth experiencing. It was a slow process, but for the first time in eons, it was no longer alone with its terror. The galaxy was a little brighter, because a small human had chosen to laugh instead of scream, and that made all the difference.